Hi.
Hello, welcome to Embercombe Online. Just letting everybody arrive. We've got quite a lot of people coming in tonight. Fantastic. I think that's probably everybody. Welcome. Lots of familiar faces. Great. Thank you everyone for coming. Tonight we're talking about dreaming and belonging, and we're really excited to have Toko-pa Turner with us tonight from Canada. She is a teacher, an author of a best-selling book called Belonging. She is a dream worker. And I think certainly for me, the interesting thing about your work, which I really love, Toko-pa, I love it when your newsletters arrive. They're just always kind of wisdom that I need to hear in that moment, is that you're looking at, or you come from a mix of Jungian dream work and Sufism. And there's something really, really exciting about that mixture. So welcome to you tonight. I will just dive in with the first question and then we'll see where we go from there, just so that everybody knows, for people that haven't been before. What we'll do is just have about 40 minutes of me and Toko-pa talking, and then if you have questions, put them up in the chat, or we'll take live questions at the end. So yeah, really looking forward to it. Toko-pa, welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Bless you. Thank you. So I love to start. Your name, Toko-pa, it says on your website, it comes from a Maori creation myth and means parent of the mist. And you've written something beautiful about that, being seeing the mist as part of this veil between the outer world and the inner world, the veil between worlds. And that your mission really is to be the bridge between those worlds through the work that you do. And I just wanted to start by asking you, how important do you feel it is for us to be looking at building that bridge between the visible and the invisible, the inner and the outer in these times? And how does that relate to our feeling of belonging, which obviously is the subject of your book? And sorry, that's a huge question. But,
I'll do my best to circumambulate. Yeah, so Toko-pa is my given name. My parents gave me that name, and it was quite challenging to grow up with such a name. But when I got older and started to research where the name came from, and started to reckon with this idea that Toko-pa in the Maori tradition is the parent of the mist. This just seemed to resonate so much with the life path that I found myself on, which was as a devotee to and apprentice to and teacher of dreams and dream work. And so since beginning to speak publicly about dreams, probably about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more, I realized that this was such a taboo subject. For the most part, people kind of dismiss their dreams, and there's a sense that dreams are not important, or that they're just sort of the synapses firing in our neurons, and so not a lot of value is placed on our dreams. In fact, deeply embedded in our lexicon is this idea of it's just a dream and that we should just dismiss it. But the way that I understand dreams is not just the nocturnal visions that we're having at night, but actually I have a much broader definition of dream work. And for me, that definition is the practice of reciprocity between the seen and the unseen worlds. So that's why I use the image of a living bridge when I talk about the relationship or dialogue or conversational nature of this relating between the seen and the unseen, between the sacred and the mundane, between the holy and the profane. The bridge between them, I think, is what has in modernity really fallen into disrepair. So when you look at most indigenous cultures around the world, those that still exist and those that have been driven into extinction, dream work has always been central to culture, to the maintaining of tribal relationships, family relationships, and to the vision of the culture itself, so that it can understand through this greater knowing which direction to move in. And we can talk about more about what I mean by that, but maybe that just gives you a general idea of why I think the reparations to that bridge are so essential.
And when you say dream work, then what exactly do you mean? I know that I scribble my dreams down every morning, but that's pretty much it. So how do you work with them? How do Indigenous cultures work with them in a way that allows them to move?
Well, there are so many different traditions, and I couldn't possibly name enough of them, but because they're all really vastly different from each other. Some traditions involve just talking about the dreams, and there are all these people who are central in the culture who are there and skilled at understanding dream language. And unfortunately, in our culture, the only framework that we have on dreams is a psychological framework. And there is a lot of value in that framework because, say, like the pioneering Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung and Freud, also in his own right, paved a great deal of distance to helping us understand the structure of the psyche and let's say the architecture of the dream language itself. But I, for myself, found that at a certain point that was a limiting viewpoint, because many Indigenous cultures practice much more embodied, we could even say somatic approaches to dream work, where even from an animistic point of view, there is no disconnection between the body and the dream, between the dream and the land that we live on. So I'm very interested in having these multiple conversations at once. So when I often hold retreats, I have an annual retreat that I hold here on the West Coast, and people come back in reunion each year, and we try to practice through many different disciplines. So we use movement, we use beauty making, artwork, we use song, we use ritual, and we pay attention to and learn about the native species and beings on the land that we are occupying, so that we can have this also other than human perspective on the dreaming.
So would you say that a dream then kind of is the embodiment of kind of all the voices on that particular piece of land? Is that the earth speaking to humans?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we are dreaming the earth's dreams, the earth dreaming, and that the easiest way to understand that is through the language ecosystem, that we are part of this larger ecosystem. And we often forget that because human centricity is so pervasive in our culture that we just think of nature as a kind of lovely backdrop upon which the human drama takes place. But actually we are part of this ecosystem. And so the way that I understand dreams is that dreaming is nature. It is nature naturing through us. So in the same way that a tree may give fruits, or a bush may give scented flowers. Dreams are fruiting from us, and they are the expression, yes, of our personal lives, but also the expression of our collective culture, and then also the expression of the ecosystem itself.
And then collective dreams, then do you see kind of themes that run through groups of people, say in your annual retreat? Do you get to the point where people are dreaming on the same theme?
Yeah, this is one of the most exciting things about gathering in the body to dream together, because if you, or even sometimes I hold online courses that are longer form. So right now I'm in the process of holding something I call the Dream Lodge, which goes for 8 weeks and potentially 16 weeks. And in a period of that length with an intimate group of people, you absolutely begin to see, first of all, when you share your dreams into a circle, you do begin to see themes and motifs and images morphing and shared by the circle in many different people's dreams. But also, you begin to understand that the circle itself is the teacher. So there is something that we are working through collectively. Let's say we have a shared mission or a shared question, which reveals itself to us as we begin to work with our dreams together. And that's, I think, one of the most exciting things about dreams, is that they really require us to be in relationship with each other. It's often quite difficult to understand your own dreams, but I'm sure you have this experience as soon as you tell your dream to somebody who is hospitable to listening to dreams, which is somewhat rare to find, that the act of telling itself can be quite revealing, isn't it? So just the act of sharing the dream can be quite a powerful and transformative experience.
Wow. And do you find then, for your group that's been together on the land for a long time, do you feel that there's still a dream connection when everybody goes back to their own pieces of land? Does that kind of, is there almost like their own land speaks as well? Or perhaps actually we should just think of land as planet Earth, you know, we're all on one land, aren't we? How does that work?
Well, that is the goal. But of course, having great distance between people is very challenging to maintain intimacy, especially in online learning environments. And so this is why from the beginning, I wanted to create a retreat which would act as a place of reunion, so that we would keep having this touchstone to return to again and again. And we have seen through this community of dreamers who've been coming back for years in a row that absolutely this place becomes a touchstone. But we do find that it's really the coming together in the body that is one of, we have these very powerful experiences together online. But what you're talking about is maintaining, relating, and relationship across great distances, which I'm sure in all walks of life is quite difficult to do.
Yeah, there's an interesting question here from Jennifer further back. Is it possible to dream on behalf of others? Can you set an intention to dream for someone else?
Of course, yeah. I mean, this is the path of shamans. Is really that is the profession of a shaman, is to use their own dreaming, whether that dreaming is while they are awake and in a ritual, or plant induced state, or whether you're actually using nocturnal dreams to help the healing and find solutions for other people, and not just people, solutions for creativity, solutions in our community. I mean, the solutions for physical healing and all of that. The danger that I find in this question is a lot of people often jump to the assumption when they dream of another person that it's for that person. And what this does is it circumvents the often necessary step in working with a dream, which is to really pull back the projections that we have on other people and recognize the symbolic dimensions for our own personal growth. And so this is tricky territory, because I know in a lot of new age and spiritual circles, we can see people saying things like, I dreamed this for you and this is what you should do, or I had this intuition that I feel is important for you. And this is actually quite a violent act, because when somebody tells you a dream or is vulnerable in some other way, they might be vulnerable to the suggestions of somebody else. And so I'm very cautious about this question about dreaming on behalf of others. I think one needs to be very properly trained in their tradition in order to be given that privilege and to share teachings on behalf of other people. Like it needs consent.
Okay, we're getting lots of questions coming up, and I'll say most of them, I think, probably till the last section. But I'd love to kind of just talk about this issue of belonging, because that was the title of your book. Can you say anything about this feeling of not belonging that we all seem to carry somewhere, you know, in our psyche, you know? What's the relevance here of dream work and the invisible and visible? I'd love to hear you talk about that if possible.
Yeah, well, it's my favorite subject. And as you mentioned, I wrote a book about it. So there's a lot to say on the subject. But, you know, I had been doing dream work for about 20 years. And it was only about 6 or 7 years ago that I started to realize that there was this silent conversation not being had, but yet incredibly present in so many of the people that I worked with and in my personal life, which was this deep feeling of not belonging, which I saw repetitively in so many of the people I work with and in my personal relationships in my community and in myself. And I began to talk to people about it, and to even people who appeared to be, from my perspective, on the inside of belonging. They too felt a sense of alienation and not belonging. And I started to see suddenly how this was an epidemic condition in our culture, this feeling of loneliness, of exile, of feeling like an outsider, of not belonging. And so it was when I started to deeply petition my dreams for teachings around this, that I started to receive some very powerful insights into the relationship between dream work and belonging. And I realized that a lot of the work that I had already been doing was this work of retrieving the parts of the self that had been pushed into exile, pushed into rejection, which had been denied or derided or pushed away by others in our culture, in our families, and so on. And the work of dream work is about coming back into relationship with those, what I call refugee aspects of the self. And this work of coming back into belonging with the parts of ourself, selves that have been exiled, created a kind of symmetrical behavior and field in the outside world, that as we start to dismantle the biases and shadows and denials that we have at the level of self, it actually creates a much more hospitable and invitational countenance in the world. And so it actually teaches us a skillfulness around becoming welcoming towards difference and towards otherness. And so in this way, dream work and belonging are almost synonymous for me.
Fantastic. I guess we're so used to thinking of belonging being something about ancestry or relationship to the land, you know, that whole idea of, well, actually that the belonging is inside ourselves, and we can potentially build that bridge inside ourselves. I think that's fantastic. I love it.
Well, and it's an and both situation, right? Because those things that you mentioned too are incredibly important. And I would say that one of the origins of our estrangement really is the fact that we are displaced people. Very few of us live on the land that is indigenous to our people's people. So we do have that very literal displacement in our ancestry, which we also have to reckon with.
And I love the idea that actually that's connected as well, because it's the land that is possibly dreaming with us. So fantastic. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about serving the world, if you like. I mean, we kind of tend to think, I suppose, as dream workers being an individual thing, that we're kind of bringing back the refugee part of ourselves, or you know, or teaching dreams or prophetic dreams. But what about using this work to be of more service? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as we talked about earlier, I really do think of dreaming as nature itself naturing through us. And so the work that we are doing at the level of the personal to ultimately unhinder our true selfness, which is all continuously expanding, just like nature is, until it begins to decline. And so as we unhinder our expression, as we unhinder ourselves of unnecessary fear, as we unhinder ourselves of ungrieved grief, then we become more essentially ourselves. And in that act can bring forward the elixirs of our descent. So in coming into relationship with our true nature, we naturally, what follows is that we have a greater service to offer the collective. And I really do think these things are inseparable. So when I think of the self, I am thinking of nature, of the holy in nature. I don't think we can separate psyche, culture, and nature anymore. I think we're in a time where we have to think in a more multiplicitous way. We have to think on these many levels at once. And so I think it's the way of all of nature to be in service to something greater than itself alone, right? So in the same way that a tree provides shade and offers oxygen and creates a home, and sends nutrients through its roots to other parts of the system, and you know, a mycelial network which lives under the forest floor, which feeds the entire forest. It's our nature to do the same. And I really think that our negligence of this reciprocity of giving and receiving, if we are just receiving, trying to do for ourselves alone, then that is more than anything else what creates a feeling of loneliness.
Just as you're talking, I'm thinking about something I read from you about how we're all a vibrational pulse. I think is that how you described it? Or
I think you're talking about a vibratory signature.
Yeah, beautiful, absolutely, yes. I remember half of it.
Yeah, so I just use that language to describe what I think is, you know, to talk about how we compare ourselves so much to other people, and we often imitate each other or compare ourselves falsely to other people. But there is no way, if you are putting your true feelings and experience and stamp onto something, there's no way that it will be like anybody else's thing, because there is this vibratory signature, which is more important than what you do. It's how you do it. So the more of yourself you can bring to bear on any given moment, on your relationships and on what you offer, it is that vibratory signature which will be felt first by anybody who receives it or witnesses it.
Fantastic. Gosh, there's so many things I could ask you. Don't really know where to go. I'm going to ask you some of these that are coming up. A couple of people have asked about recurring dreams and what they might mean.
Yeah, so the easiest way to think of a recurring dream is there is a recurring um, issue that is coming to light in that moment. And so the reason why dreams recur is a little bit like being stuck in a loop. So just to sort of break it down for you, a recurring dream will happen when there's some sort of trigger or threat or environmental circumstance which which you have a reaction to, which is habitually the same. And so the threat is then negotiated by a certain strategy, whatever your strategy is, whether that strategy is to get angry, or whether the strategy is to bury it, or whether it's to run away from whatever the threat may be. And then that strategy has an outcome, and the outcome is usually unresolved. And so you see it goes in this loop over and over again. And so we often say in trauma and experiences of trauma or PTSD, we'll see people having violent dreams over and over again, which will, in a sense, re-experience the trauma. And in a way, this is a healthy adaptation, because often the trauma may be too much to process in the moment that it happened, or even over the course of time. And so the dream is really attempting to integrate what has happened to you. But because our culture dismisses dreams and teaches us that they are unimportant, we push them away. And this can be said of most people when they have a so-called bad dream or nightmare. We want to get it as far away from us as possible. That's when we don't write down in our journal, and we try to forget it because it's awful and we have such a terrible physical reaction to it. And in a way, it feels like our dream maker, who creates these dreams, is torturing us by putting us in this recurring circumstance over and over again. But the piece that we need to reframe is that there's a reason why this dream is showing up. And if we can only make a decision to just be curious about it enough to write it down, or to really look a little deeper into it, we have an opportunity there to take something which has become thwarted and discarded and even violent in nature, and try to understand why and how that's happening. So if we can understand the nature of the threat by looking deeper into the images of the dream and just being curious about it, we can begin to unlock the energy that is clustered in that dream. So it's kind of like trapped power. And by becoming curious about that often threatening or repulsive or scary imagery, we have the chance at understanding what is the threat that we are negotiating and what is the strategy that we're choosing to negotiate that threat. And is there a different strategy that we can begin to employ in waking life that might create a different outcome? So in my experience, working with somebody who has, PTSD is a deeper process because we're dealing with something really unruly that has that needs to be unpacked over a great deal of time. But if that isn't the case for you, if it's something let's say more scalable, then often what happens is when we work with recurring dreams, simply by the act of exploring and talking about them, we can dissipate. Somebody will not have that recurring dream ever again once they understand why they're having it, how they're responding to it, and how that dynamic is causing the situation to recur over and over again.
Wow, fantastic. Another question that we've got coming up. Sorry, I'm just hitting you with lots of questions.
Okay, keep them coming.
Okay, here's another one. Another question I've got coming up, which you must get a lot of people asking, is, okay, I don't have any dreams, so how do I start them?
Yeah. So first of all, everybody dreams every night. And I would just even take that a step further and say that there is a dreaming channel that you can tap into at any time, sleeping or waking. We call this the second attention. We have the first attention, which pays attention to the physical world, and the second attention pays attention to the world behind this world, which is the symbolic dimension. So everybody dreams all the time. The reason why people don't remember their dreams is because everything in our culture tells us that they are not important, and therefore we don't value them, we don't venerate them, we don't make space for them, we don't have practices around paying attention to them, to tending to them, to retrieving their wisdom, to offering thanks back for what we've gotten. So I have something on my website called the Dream Recovery Kit, and it is my best tips and tools for just getting your dreaming flowing again. And I offer a kind of guarantee that if you follow these tips, you can literally be dreaming within a week or two, and it's never failed for anyone. But the bigger piece is not the tips and tricks, it's the giving value to your dreams and actually carving out a place in your life for dreams to be remembered.
Wow, okay. Another one that is coming up a lot, prophetic dreams.
Is there a question?
Yeah, well, what are prophetic dreams? Are they kind of things that are going to happen in first attention waking reality, or are they kind of personal? What's the nature of prophetic dreams? And I suppose when should we take note of them?
Yeah, well, that's a really tricky one because, in a lot of historical texts, you will read about, so-called prophetic dreams, which had terrible historical consequences. Armies went into battle thinking they would, they had a prophetic dream that the army would win. And so they went to this particular route and then it was a bloodbath, as a silly example, not a silly example, but as one example. And so the problem is that it's so let's just talk about precognitive dreams. Precognitive dreams are super normal, really, really normal. Once you start to remember your dreams, you have all kinds of precognitive information that comes through your dreaming. And this is a bit of a complex subject, but I'll try and make it as simple as possible. That the way that we think about time in the let's say Western comprehension of time and modernity, we think of it as a linear, present, past, and future. But in many, like in the Aboriginal, in the Aboriginals of Australia, and the way that they think of time is more circular in nature, time circles. So actually in dreams, we can receive all kinds of information that will help us actually heal the past as if it happened in a different way, and information which talks about what is about to happen in the future. And all of that can be brought to bear on how we walk in present time. So the trick is, when do you know if something is precognitive or not? And this takes some mastery. In my experience, precognitive dreams actually have a tonal difference to them. They will feel less narrative in nature, and more objective. It's a little hard to describe the texture of that, but I've had many incredible experiences where a dream has happened to me or been given to me, and then I wake up from that dream, and then that thing quite literally happens in waking life, usually around the same, few days or something like that. But in my experience, when people start to work more with their dreams and really include it in their way of life, that this kind of synchronicity and precognition becomes really normal. That doesn't stop it from being amazing, but it just becomes usual. As one of my dear friends says, when something amazing happens, how usual. Because how usual to be able to be tuned into magic and synchronicity and the merging between the worlds.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the bridge is being built between the two worlds? Do you think it is an ongoing process and will become more and more traveled?
Yeah. I think we have a very long way to go. This culture is extremely dependent on rationalism, certainty, and literality. So in an umbrella term, to just say materialistic. So anything that is, tangible, everything is built around that. And I think there is a subculture, or many subcultures, that are the emerging consciousness, where people are giving more value to the unseen world. Certainly, people like your good self at Embercombe, and then also all of the listeners who are with us today who are even interested in having this conversation. But I think we are just babies still, and learning how to give relevance to the symbolic dimension, to the mythic dimension.
Mm-hmm. And in the dream circles that you're part of, Toko-pa, do you feel that there is is there a message? Are there common messages from the earth, from the land at the moment? Is there a change? Do you see collective change? Or
I would say the biggest thing that I am seeing is the rise of the feminine. And so when I say the feminine, I don't just mean in women body, in women-born bodies, female-born bodies, but the feminine, a woman is not custodian of femininity. However, there are a huge, I would say, the lion's share of the people who seem to be interested in repairing this bridge are women. But the feminine is this whole, in Jungian terms, the feminine is this whole vast network of disciplines and qualities and aptitudes, which include dream work, ritual, feeling, somatic exploration, movement, dance, body work, natural medicine, divination, witchcraft. There's this, natural healing. There's this huge rise in feminine ways of knowing right now. And I think a lot of us are still really struggling with how absent the feminine is in our culture. And so all of us are working at different places in our lives to give voice to the feminine. And that might look like choosing a path that's independent of institutions. It looks like the huge swell of support finally for anti-racism and the elevating of Indigenous voices. It looks like the protection of our environment and climate justice. It looks like people, women especially, standing in their own way of knowing and using their voices to rise above the rest. So, so there are all different ways that we struggle with finding our voices, especially having to combat the dominant culture, which encroaches upon all of those different things we talked about.
Wow, thank you. Brilliant answer. And I'm just thinking how much we would love you to come to Embercombe, because it just feels like our kind of values and understandings and dreamings are quite, in sync, really. I think probably my last question before we just move to some other voices is these times, we haven't really touched on these strange times as we've been talking, but do you have a word of advice for us as individuals or us collectively in these times? And these times, well, we don't even need to name what times they are, but what would your advice be?
Well, wow, what an amazing time to be a human right now. It's really tough. I think we are going through a kind of collective initiation right now. And what I mean by that is there does seem to be this crumbling of old dogmas and old systems. The smashing of the patriarchy, and it's a long process. There's a lot of smashing to be done, so it's not happening overnight. Even in relation to the COVID, which we are battling worldwide at the time of this conversation, it is all about human encroachment onto wilderness, right? That's how this disease emerged, because our species didn't co-evolve with this virus, and so our encroachment caused it to spread into the human population. So right now, I think if I were to pull out any one single piece that I thought was so important, it is really to consider pulling back our allegiances to the old systems that are in place. And in fact, I would even take that a step further and say our allegiance to the outside world. and instead use this time, if you are someone who is privileged enough to be safe in quarantine at home, if you do have time and space, to really consider bringing allegiance back to the inner life. Because right now we are being pulled in so many different directions, all of the opinions of other people, all of the huge sort of cataclysmic expressions of grief and hardship on all levels. It's hard to know how to even begin. And I think if we can turn our allegiances back to the inner life, there's a chance that we can find something true, something essential, something valuable at the level of the self, which will locate us in the swirl of this time of dissolution, of dissolving. And by being located, we can then begin to act and interact in a way that is authentic and grounded in our own truth and knowing, instead of being pulled in so many different directions by the outside world. So, that's always the soapbox that I'm standing on is, let's use whenever we can within a day to turn back to find the anchor, which is in the ground of our own knowing, and to keep strengthening that little fire, that little voice that sometimes we barely hear, because it's that which is going to allow us to meaningfully act and interact in the world. If we take our cues from the outside first instead, then we will constantly burn out. We will be drawn into false belonging. We will be opinionated instead of informed by the truth of who we are.
Wow, I think that's about the best advice I've ever heard. I'm climbing onto your soapbox. I love that. Great. Okay, I'm going to open it up to some questions before we run out of time. I feel like I've hogged the question time, really. We're going to open up. I'd like to ask Catherine, who up the chat asked a question. Where are we? How do you bring balance? What to do if a dream practice becomes overwhelming? Catherine, so it's Catherine Cummings. Catherine, do you want to see if you can unmute yourself and ask Toko-pa directly? If not, then I will read out again. Let's see if you're able to unmute.
I do get that question a lot. It's sort of the opposite side of having not enough dreams. Some people get overwhelmed by dream material. And in a case like that, what I would suggest is actually letting some of the smaller fish go. You don't have to write down every single dream. If something really has roots, it will come back again and again in infinite, inexhaustible forms. So if there is one dream that you can work with at a more depth level, that will be more valuable than trying to do all of the things all at once. So were we able to get Catherine on the line?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Hi. Does that resonate for you?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I had never had a dreaming practice, and so I followed your advice. I was really profoundly impacted by your book. And I was so surprised at how consuming the experience was when I got started. And it almost felt like I could spend my whole life working with these dreams. So it was a little bit almost scary. And I have to confess, I kind of let it go a bit. But
yeah,
they'll come, and I want to be able to work with them, but to not be driven by them.
Yes, and I completely understand. And that's how I ended up devoting my life to dreams, because I just found them so endlessly valuable and rich and gorgeous. But I do also understand that if you don't have support in your life, like a dreaming circle or friendship or even a therapeutic relationship where you can go and be held, it can be psychically overwhelming to have a huge amount of dreaming material. And it's completely okay for it to ebb and flow out of your life like that. But I want to invite you to try just petitioning your dream maker to be more succinct, to have a conversation with your dream maker and say, I'm feeling overwhelmed and I really want to have a relationship with you, but I wonder if you could maybe just give me a shorter dream or a clearer dream, something that would be easier to process. And you'll be quite surprised by how responsive the dreams will be. Now, here's the trick. If you then receive just a fragment of a dream, you can't dismiss it and say it's not enough of a dream. And that's the temptation. You're like, okay, well, that wasn't a real dream, because you're used to having these epic dreams with all of these subplots and all these characters. So another thing you can do is just zero in on one scene of a dream. I would pick, so if you ask yourself the question, where's my strongest feeling in the dream? That can help you identify the heart of the dream. And if you just tend to that one part of the garden instead of trying to, weed out the whole field, then you can create something quite beautiful there. And the tending process itself will help to bring clarity in your dreams over time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your question, Catherine.
Yeah.
If anybody has a question, let's have a look. We have about 8 minutes left, which is great news. If anybody has a question, do you want to wave? That's probably the easiest of doing.
Do people know how to raise their hand?
We can do it electronically, or we can just wave and I can scroll through. Let's have a look. Should we try to scroll through first? If you have a question, just raise your hand.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Inês. I'm Portuguese working in the UK at the moment. Thank you so much. This is an amazing session.
Yeah.
Toko, you've mentioned the rise of the feminine and the Jungian significance of this. Oh, I don't have a grammar, sorry. Basically, my question, or I'm discovering a lot of things regarding this theme. I would like to ask you, what is the role of the natural medicines, and when you're journeying or doing breath works, or when you're doing some inside work and you're dreaming but you're almost awake, what would be your advice? And thanks a lot for this session. Let me get my camera.
It's lovely to hear your voice, Inez, and I'm not sure I totally understood your question. So part of it was about natural medicine, and was it two questions?
I think it was 2 questions. So basically,
there you are. Hi.
Yes, sorry, I'm in my workplace.
Yeah.
Regarding breath work, and when you're awake but you're having information, and sometimes you get autobiographic information, or you get this kind of altered conscious levels that are, that you're awake, but your mind is in another kind of dimension, so to speak. So basically, how would you consider dreams in this breath work, like allotropic breathing, these kind of techniques that you are provoking some changes in your sensorium? How do you think this is kind of a natural way, is this helpful? Is this, how do you perceive this when?
Okay, I think I understand your question. Well, there are so many different modalities that when we're working in those modalities, we can receive imagery, receive images. So for instance, with plant medicine journeys, I've heard a lot of people talk about the images that they receive. And unfortunately, there is often nobody in the environment to help process and hold space for understanding what those images mean. The same thing can happen with body work. We could be receiving some kind of body work and suddenly an image appears and we don't know what to do with it. Well, for me, this is still dreaming. It's just that you happen to be awake. And so if something particularly powerful came through, I would certainly encourage you to explore it in greater depth. And there are many simple ways that you can do that. It could be as simple as, let's say an animal visited you in one of your visions or dreams, and that animal was an owl. So then you could, I don't really like this idea of searching what is the symbol, what does the symbol mean? This is usually rubbish because we get a lot of these dream dictionaries, right? And we want a dream dictionary to work because we just want to look it up and say, what does that symbol mean? But often it's like junk food. It may give you something that is kind of like eating, but it's not really going to be nutritious for you at all. It's more interesting to have a relationship with that animal. And so how do you have a relationship with anyone? You circle around it and you try to understand who it is and how it behaves and what does it have to say and what is its value and what does it love and what is it longing for. And the way that I usually do this is if I have an animal that I don't know anything about, I will learn about its habitat and how it behaves and how it moves, and begin to bring images into my physical space. So I have a dream altar, and on that altar, I will bring images or symbols that are current for me so that I can keep being in dialogue and conversation with them. And sometimes I will enact small rituals to bring that conversation more into relationship with me. For me, my particular way of working with images is to write. And so I often or always write down my associations before looking in any books anywhere. I turn to my own information first. And I ask, oh, what does owl, how do I feel about owl? What is owl's character? When have I ever met an owl? What is I met an owl many times, but I met an owl a few months ago. I was going for a walk and there was this owl up in the tree. I suddenly just felt eyes on me and I looked up and there was this owl staring at me with the most yellow eyes, and it was terrifying. If you've ever had an owl look right at you, you know that owls are not to be messed with. They're not like, ooh, it's symbolic of your visionary capacity. Like, that's just nonsense, It's like owl is powerful. And so there's, what I mean? So it's like, it's important to treat your symbols as living, breathing beings so that you can try to forge a relationship with them. And this is why I love the word courtship in my work with dreams, because we're really trying to make a courtship of the symbols in our dreams that we may become more intimate with them.
And then you build a relationship with your own dreams and your imagery and your pattern. That's like music. It's amazing.
Yes, you
Thank
get
you.
it. You totally get it. Thanks, Inez.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. We're on 8 o'clock, so we're going to have to stop there, sadly, always sadly, but
Darn
particularly
it.
tonight. Yeah, I just want to say again what you said about, well, I just wanted to repeat the words allegiance to the inner life. For me, that just kind of, okay, that gives me permission to do exactly that, and I'm sure a lot of us will feel the same. There's some comments here about it too. Thank you so much, Toko-pa. It's been such excitement to have you, and thank you for your generosity of time and for all the questions, and we've all got loads. We would certainly love you to have you again. We would love you to visit sometime if you can.
I would love to. When they let us travel, I would love to come back to Devon, which is my the place of my birth, and I have not been there since I left when I was 4 years old. And there's been a lot of synchronicity around Devon, so consider that a yes for whenever they let us travel again.
Fabulous. Okay, as soon as they do, as soon as our borders are open, you shall receive an invitation.
Beautiful. Thanks to you, Rachel, for hosting us, and for everyone who showed up today. It was really gorgeous to be in your presence.
Bless you. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. See you again next week, and lots of love, everybody.